Hello students. Humor always brings us laughter. It gives us smiles, but sometimes it can be very effectively used to point out certain vices and follies in our lives. Today we have a poem, The Tale of the Melon City by Mr. Vikram Seth. It is a narrative poem, a long story. And Mr. Vikram Seth was born in 1952 in Kolkata. He is a famous Indian poet who is famous internationally, has been awarded many prizes like the Commonwealth Poetry Prize and the Commonwealth Writers Prize. He has written a vast collection of works, and this poem is taken from his collection of poems, Mappings. He has also written The Golden Gate, A Suitable Boy and an Equal Music, and Two Lives, all of them very popular novels. Now, this poem is a humorous satire. It points out to the fact that justice is a virtue, but it loses its significance if it is stretched too far. It also makes us familiar with the concept of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire was an economic principle which said that the government should not be interfering in the private affairs of the common man. It has been taken to another level in this poem. Now, we must understand what is a humorous satire. The satire is a genre of literature where humor is used to ridicule follies and vices. A way of using humor to highlight weaknesses or folly. Let's try to understand the poem first. The poem can be divided into three parts for the purpose of understanding, but let's first read the poem. The Tale of the Melon City by Vikram Seth. In the city of which I sing, there was a just and placid king. The king proclaimed an ark should be constructed that triumphantly would span the major thoroughfare to edify spectators there. The workmen went and built the thing. They did so since he was the king. The king rode down the thoroughfare to edify spectators there. Under the ark he lost his crown. The ark was built too low. A frown appeared upon his placid face. The king said, "This is a disgrace. The chief of builders will be hanged." The rope and gallows were arranged. The chief of builders was led out. He passed the king. He gave a shout. "O king, it was the workmen's fault." "Oh," said the king, and called a halt to the proceedings, being just and placider. Now he said, "I must have all the workmen hang instead." The workmen looked surprised and said, "O king, you do not realize the bricks were made of the wrong size." "Summon the masons," said the king. The masons stood there quivering. It was the architect, they said. The architect was summoned. "Well, architect," said his majesty, "I do ordain that you shall be hanged." Said the architect, "O king, you have forgotten one small thing. You made certain amendments to the plans when I showed them to you." The king heard this. The king saw red. In fact, he nearly lost his head. But being a just and placid king, he said, "This is a tricky thing. I need some counsel. Bring to me the wisest man in this country." The wisest man was found and brought, nay, carried to the royal court. He could not walk and could not see. So old and therefore wise was he. But in a quivering voice he said, "The culprit must be punished. Truly, the ark it was that banged the crown off, and it must be hanged." To the scaffold the ark was led, when suddenly a counsellor said, "How can we hang so shamefully? What touched your head, your majesty?" "True," mused the king. By now the crowd, restless, was muttering aloud. The king perceived their mood and trembled, and said to all who were assembled, "Let us postpone consideration of finer points like guilt. The nation wants a hanging. Hanged must be someone, and that immediately." The noose was set up somewhat high. Each man was measured by and by, but only one man was so tall. He fitted one man, that was all. He was the king. His majesty was therefore hanged by royal decree. "Thank goodness we found someone," said the ministers, "for if instead we had not, the unruly town might well have turned against the crown." "Long live the king," the ministers said. "Long live the king is dead." They pondered the dilemma, then being practical-minded men, sent out heralds to proclaim, in his former majesty's name, as is our custom, this will be enforced with due ceremony. A man passed by the city gate, an idiot the guards cried, wait, who is to be the king, decide. A melon, the idiot replied. This was his standard answers to all questions. He liked melons. You are now our king, the minister said, crowning a melon. Then they led the melon to the throne and reverently set it down. This happened years and years ago. When now you ask the people, so your king appears to be a melon? How did this happen? They say, well, on account of his majesty's of his customary choice, if his majesty rejoice in being a melon, that's okay. With us, for who are we to say what he should be as long he leaves us in peace and liberty? The principles of laissez-faire seem to be well established there. It is a long poem, but a simple story. Let's divide the poem into three parts for the purpose of understanding. In the beginning, we are told about a just and loving king who orders an ark spanning the main thoroughfare. It is built, and accidentally when the king goes and visits the thoroughfare, the king's crown is knocked off. He is angry and livid, and he decides that the builder, the chief of the builder, will be hanged for this offense. How dare he built an ark which was so low that it knocked off the king's crown. When the chief of builder, every preparation was done, everything was done, and when the chief of builders was brought to the gallows, he shouted that it was not his fault, it was the workmen's fault, the laborers' fault. Then the king thoughtlessly decided that the laborers will be hanged, and then the laborers are brought on. When the laborers are brought in, they blame the mason, and when the mason is brought in for hanging, he blames the architect. So finally the architect is brought. When the architect is brought there, he reminds the king that it was the king himself who had changed the plans, and so now the offender is the king himself. Now the king is again very angry, very confused, he doesn't know what to do. So he says that I need to be counseled, and you should bring the wisest man in the kingdom to him. The wisest man is brought to the kingdom. He is considered wise only because he is old and he cannot walk, he cannot see, and so by the virtue of being old, he is wise. And now there is another stupid decision, an idiotic decision taken by the wise man. He says that it is the ark who is at fault and it should be hanged. This is the ridiculousness of this is increasing, and that in the second part, the ark is brought to be hanged, but then one of the counselors says that since the ark touched the king's head, it cannot be hanged. Now the crowd is furious, the ministers don't know what to do, the king has no decision, so he says let's not think who is guilty and who is not, let's just hang someone, because someone has to be hanged. So what they do is they start measuring every man by the noose, and who measures up? Finally, the king himself. He is the tallest man and he measures up to the noose. And then because he measures up to the noose, he is hanged. Now, without thinking about any points of justice, they hang the king. The king is killed. Now they don't have a king, so they need a new king. There is a custom that whoever walks through the gate, city gate first is to decide the king. So, as their luck would have it, an idiot walks in who answers everything with the standard answer, a melon. When he is asked who would be the king, he says a melon. And in all stupidity, in following traditions and not thinking originally, they place a melon on the throne and he is the king for years and years to come. And now when they are asked why they have placed a melon on the throne, why is their king a melon, he says, the normal public says, we are happy because he does not interfere in our lives and we are at peace and liberty. Now this is a very telling satire on the human tendency to act on set lines. They are so hard-lined that they don't understand that they are not able to justify the hanging of the king. And they hang their own king and then make a melon their king. We are also told about the tradition bound ignorance, how we are not willing to change and we make ridiculous, funny and sometimes stupid decisions. And there is a thoughtless execution of law. Just because someone had to be hanged, so the king is hanged. As you see, there is a use of humor and irony. The king is told to be just and placid. Is he really just? No, he has no idea of justice. And is he placid? Not at all. He gets angry at every point of time. And the wisest man is wisest just because he is oldest. They have only followed traditions, set lines and set decrees and not thought anything about not changing the things according to the situation. Also, who makes a Melon their king? They don't have their own minds. They have just ended up with a Melon as a king. And the principle of laissez-faire is only an economic principle, but they have just followed it to T, not realizing that it has no practical implications.